They said she was too dirty to touch, but one man dared to bring her home, bathe her, give her a name, and make room for her in his blanket. The corridors of Calder Station's Sector 8 reeked of rust and waste. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows on the metal walls that seemed to sweat with condensation. This deep in the lower levels, the air hung heavy with decay, a fitting metaphor for what had become of humanity's grand space endeavors. Rain. Corman pressed his back against the cold wall, waiting for the maintenance workers to pass. They wouldn't stop him from collecting soil samples. His work was technically authorized, but he preferred to avoid their suspicious glares and probing questions that might lead back to his past. Once the echoing footsteps faded, he continued down the narrow service tunnel. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he navigated toward soil vent SRV 408. According to station schematics, this drainage point collected runoff from 3 different sectors, making it an ideal location for his research. Rain wasn't a scientist. Not officially. He was a former ecological negotiator, a profession that had become increasingly obsolete as corporations determined that biological sterilization was more cost-effective than accommodation. His job had been to argue for the preservation of indigenous life forms when new worlds were colonized or mined. He had failed spectacularly at Kesson 3. That failure haunted his every waking moment. 17,000 Maori families gone, an entire ecosystem erased, and his lone ally on the council, Nail, silenced forever. Now he lived in solitude in a small module in Sector 8's abandoned residential zone, collecting soil samples from across the station and cataloging whatever microscopic life still clung to existence in this sterile metal world. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could redeem his silence when it mattered most, but it gave him purpose. Rain reached the vent access panel and pried it open with his compression rod. The stench that billowed out made him wince, but he was accustomed to it. He knelt, lowering his core probe into the thick, toxic sludge. The device would analyze composition, radiation levels, and any biological markers present in the waste. While the probe did its work, Rain noticed movement from the corner of his eye. He turned, expecting to see a maintenance drone or perhaps one of the massive cockroaches that thrived in the station's underbelly. Instead, he saw her. At first, she appeared to be nothing more than a mound of sludge pulling itself from a drainage pipe. But as the mass moved with deliberate, if pained, motions, Rain recognized the humanoid form beneath the filth. Small, perhaps 5 feet tall, covered in layers of dried and fresh muck that obscured all features except for 2 silvery eyes that suddenly locked with his. Those eyes held something Rain hadn't seen in years. Recognition, not of him specifically, but of something like a dream memory, a connection that transcended their immediate circumstances. Before Rain could react, voices echoed down the corridor. 3 maintenance workers rounded the corner, their conversation cutting off as they spotted the mud-covered figure. "Well, look what crawled out of the waste system," one said, his voice tinged with disgust. "Another auction reject trying to hide in the lower levels." The second worker kicked a container of rotting food toward the huddled figure. "Eat up, Frel. That's all you're worth now." Rain stood frozen, watching as the mud-covered being, woman, creature, shrunk away from the workers, those silver eyes now downcast, accepting of the abuse as though it were expected. The workers continued past, laughing amongst themselves, while Rain remained still, his soil probe forgotten in the muck. The being hadn't moved, still hunched against the wall, layers of filth masking whatever lay beneath. Every instinct told Rain to walk away. He had his own problems, his own ghosts. The last time he'd tried to help, he'd failed so catastrophically that millions had died. Who was he to interfere again? And yet, he couldn't move. Those silver eyes had seen him, not as a threat or savior, but simply as another being. In that momentary connection, Rain had felt something he'd thought long dead: empathy. With slow, deliberate movements, Rain removed his thermal jacket. He placed it on the floor between them, then backed away, giving her space. "It's warm," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "If you want it." The mud-covered figure didn't respond, didn't move toward the offering, but those silver eyes tracked his every movement, wary, yet somehow desperate. Rain nodded once, then gathered his equipment, leaving the probe to complete its cycle. He would return for it later. Right now, something more important demanded his attention: a choice between walking away, as the rest of humanity had done, or extending a hand to someone deemed too dirty to touch. He chose the latter. "My module is 3 corridors down," he said, not looking directly at her. "Section 23B. The door will be unlocked." Rain walked away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. He didn't look back to see if she followed, giving her the dignity of choice. But he hoped, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope, that she would find her way to his door. His module was small, but meticulously organized. One wall held shelves of labeled soil samples. Another contained his sparse personal belongings. A fold-down bed occupied the far wall, while a small kitchenette with a heating element and synthesizer took up the remaining space. It wasn't much, but it was clean and warm, a stark contrast to the corridor where he'd found her. Rain moved quickly, clearing a space near the heating vent. He placed a thermal blanket on the floor, along with a container of water and a bowl of synthetic protein soup. Then, he retreated to his workstation, pretending to focus on his samples while keeping the door unlocked. An hour passed. Rain began to think she wouldn't come. Why should she trust him when humanity had given her every reason not to? Just as he was about to give up hope, a soft scraping sound came from the doorway. She stood there, still covered in filth. Rain's jacket clutched tightly to her chest rather than worn. Her silver eyes darted around the room, assessing threats, escape routes. Rain remained perfectly still, allowing her to make her own decision. After what seemed like an eternity, she stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind her. She remained by the exit, her body tense with fear and suspicion. Rain gestured toward the prepared space. "Water, food, when you're ready." He turned back to his work, giving her privacy, though he was acutely aware of her every movement. Gradually, the sounds of hesitant sipping reached his ears. He allowed himself a small smile of relief. It was a start. Over the next few hours, a cautious routine developed. Rain worked at his station, analyzing soil samples and cataloging results, while his visitor remained in her corner, slowly consuming the water and soup he'd provided. Neither spoke, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. As night cycle approached, Rain prepared his own meal, more of the same protein soup, with added salt for flavor. He placed a fresh bowl near his visitor, along with a clean cloth and a small container of warmed water. "For washing, if you want," he explained, then retreated to his bed, turning his back to give her privacy. He didn't sleep, couldn't sleep with a stranger in his module. But he lay still, controlling his breathing, creating the illusion of slumber. Through slitted eyes, he watched as she cautiously approached the washing water. With trembling hands, she dipped the cloth into the warm liquid. Her movements were ritualistic, practiced. She began with her face, gently wiping away layers of filth to reveal skin underneath. Skin that was not the pale or brown or black of human complexion, but a soft blue-green, like the shallow waters of Earth's vanished oceans. Rain's breath caught in his throat. A Miari, one of the indigenous people of Kasana 3, a world he had failed to protect, a species he had believed extinct. She froze, sensing his attention, those silver eyes locking with his across the dim room. "I'm sorry," Rain said softly. "I didn't mean to watch. I I didn't know any of your people survived." The Mayari woman clutched the washing cloth to her chest. Her body tensed for flight. But after a moment, she spoke, her voice rough and halting, as though long unused. "When they came for us, my mother turned me to mud," she whispered. "Told me not to breathe, not to move." Her fingers traced patterns in the remaining filth on her arms. "I have been mud ever since." The simple statement carried such profound grief that Rain felt his chest constrict. Here was the living consequence of his failure. A woman who had been forced to become mud to survive, to deny her very nature and existence. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered something in the flowing Miari language, a sound like water over stones. "Surilvar," Rain repeated carefully, trying to honor the pronunciation. The woman shook her head slightly. "That was before. When they auction us, they call us Frel, broken goods." Her silver eyes lowered. "I am Frel now." "No," Rain said with unexpected firmness. "You are not Frel. You are—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Ilara. It means survivor in the old Earth languages." The newly named Ilara tilted her head, considering this. "Ilara," she repeated, the word strange on her tongue. Then, so quietly Rain almost missed it. "Why did you help me?" Rain looked down at his hands, hands that had signed reports, made presentations, but had ultimately done nothing when it mattered. "I was on Kesson 3, he admitted. "I was the ecological negotiator assigned to your world. I filed appeals, requested protected status for your people. They ignored me. When the sterilization began, I was removed from the planet." His voice broke. "I couldn't stop them." He expected anger, hatred, welcomed it, even. Instead, Ilara simply watched him, those silver eyes unreadable. "You tried," she finally said. "Not many did." The simple statement, free of accusation, hit Rain harder than any condemnation could have. He nodded once, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ilara returned to her washing, methodically removing years of protective grime. With each layer that dissolved away, she seemed to grow more present, more real, no longer a ghost hiding in filth, but a woman reclaiming herself. Rain turned away, giving her privacy for this rebirth. "Sleep if you can," he said. "You're safe here." The next morning, Rain woke to find Ilara huddled under the thermal blanket, her breathing even and deep. In sleep, with much of the grime washed away, her Miari features were unmistakable: the delicate blue-green skin, the small ridges along her temples, the webbed fingers. She looked younger than he had initially thought, perhaps in her 20s by human standards, though Miari aging was different. He moved quietly, preparing a nutrient drink that would be easier on her system than solid food. The Mayari had different dietary needs than humans, but this basic mixture should help restore her strength. The soft sounds of his movement woke her. Ilara's eyes snapped open, immediately alert and afraid. Then recognition dawned, and her posture relaxed slightly. "Good morning," Rain said, keeping his tone casual. "I made you something to drink. It should help with recovery." Ilara accepted the cup cautiously, sniffing its contents before taking a small sip. Her eyes widened slightly at the taste, but she continued drinking. "Thank you," she said after finishing, her voice stronger than the previous night. Rain nodded, then turned to his workstation. "I need to complete some analyses today. You can stay here, rest. The washing facility is through that panel if you want to clean more thoroughly." He busied himself with his soil samples, giving Ilara space to decide her own actions. From the corner of his eye, he watched as she cautiously explored the small module, examining his collection of soil samples with particular interest. "You remember the dirt," she observed softly. Rain paused in his work. "Yes, When worlds are sterilized, the soil is the last repository of what once lived there. Microbes, spores, seeds. Some survive, dormant. I collect samples, document what remains. Like memories, Ilara said, touching one of the sealed containers. You keep the memories of dead places. The simple observation struck Rain deeply. That was exactly what he was doing, preserving memories, not just data. Each sample was a memorial to a world that had been deemed less valuable than human progress. Yes, he agreed, like memories. Throughout the day, they established a quiet routine. Rain worked, occasionally explaining what he was doing when he caught Ilara watching with interest. She rested, ate small amounts of the nutrient mixture he prepared, and gradually cleaned away more of the protective mud that had been her camouflage for so long. By evening, she was almost unrecognizable from the creature he had found in the drainage pipe. Her blue-green skin glowed with a faint luminescence in the dim module lighting. The ridges along her temples and the backs of her hands were now visible, intricate patterns that were both biological and cultural, as Mayari body modifications were part of their coming-of-age rituals. "You are of the river clans," Rain observed, as they shared a meal of synthesized proteins enhanced with minerals essential to Mayari physiology. Ilara looked up, surprised. "You know our ways?" Rain nodded. "I studied your people before I was assigned to Kesson III. The river clans were known for their negotiation skills and diplomacy. They often served as mediators between different Mayari groups." A shadow passed over Ilara's face. "My aunt was a council representative. She argued for cooperation with the human settlers. They killed her first." Rain's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "Your aunt? Was she named Neil?" Ilara's silver eyes widened. "You knew her?" "She was my ally on the council," Rain whispered, memories flooding back. "She was brilliant, fearless. When the final order came, she stood before the terraforming ships. I was pulled off planet before." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Before they vaporized her as an example," Ilara completed, her voice flat. "I watched from hiding. Mother had already covered me in protective mud, but I could still see through a small opening." Her hands trembled slightly. "After that, we fled to the underground rivers. Most were caught. I survived by becoming truly mud. Not just covered, but slowing my metabolism, my breathing. Mother said our ancestors used mud hibernation during droughts. I used it to become invisible." Rain reached across the small table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I'm sorry. I should have done more. Been braver. Like Niall." Ilara looked at his outstretched hand, then slowly extended her own, her webbed fingers hovering over his. "You remembered us. You keep our soil." After a moment's hesitation, she allowed her fingertips to brush against his, the first contact she had initiated. "That is something." That night, Rain gave Ilara his bed, insisting on sleeping on the floor near his workstation. As he lay in the darkness, listening to her breathing grow slow and even, he felt something shift within him. For years, he had preserved soil samples as a form of penance, a way to remember his failure. Now, in helping Ilara, he had found something he'd thought forever lost: purpose. He also found something else: danger. If Ilara had survived, hidden in the bowels of Calder Station, others might know of her existence. The workers who had taunted her called her auction reject, suggesting she had been captured and processed through the black market slave trade that still flourished in the outer systems. Someone might be looking for their lost property. Rain's concerns proved prescient sooner than he expected. 3 days after bringing Ilara to his module, as they were sharing a morning meal, his security system pinged softly. Someone was attempting to override his door lock. "Hide!" he whispered urgently to Ilara, pointing to the concealed storage compartment beneath his workstation. She moved with silent efficiency, slipping into the small space as Rain activated the emergency shield, a metal plate that would drop down to completely hide the compartment if necessary. Then, he positioned himself between the door and the hidden Ilara, gripping his soil compression rod, a tool that, with some modifications, could deliver a stunning electrical charge. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing 3 men in the utilitarian clothing of station maintenance workers. But Rain immediately recognized the falsehood. Their boots were too heavy, their postures too alert. The lead man's hand rested casually near a weapon partially concealed beneath his jacket. Slavers. They had come for Ilara. "Maintenance inspection," the leader said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've had reports of unauthorized lifeform signatures in this section." "My authorization is current," Rain replied evenly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "All my research specimens are properly documented." The second man stepped forward, a neural prod visible in his hand now. "We're not interested in your dirt samples, Corman. We're looking for something that crawled out of the drainage system a few days ago. Station says you were the last one logged in that sector." Rain's mind raced. They knew his name, had accessed station logs. This wasn't just a random search. They had tracked Ilara specifically to him. "I collect soil samples from the drainage systems," he said, keeping his voice steady. "That's all." The third man, who had remained silent until now, moved with startling speed. Before Rain could react, the man had crossed the small module and slammed him against the wall, a vibroblade humming dangerously close to his throat. "We don't have time for games," the man hissed. "The Frel is worth 6 months' salary to us. Tell us where she is, and you walk away. Resist, and we'll take her anyway, after we've decorated your module with your insides." Rain's finger found the concealed switch on his compression rod. A small indicator light blinked green. The stun modification was charged and ready. But 3 against 1 were poor odds, especially when they were armed and clearly experienced in violence. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rain insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. The leader sighed dramatically. "Search the module," he ordered the second man. "She's here somewhere." As the slaver began tearing through Rain's carefully organized shelves, Rain made his decision. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the emergency shield, the metal plate slamming down to seal the compartment where Ilara hid. The sudden movement distracted the man holding him just long enough for Rain to drive the charged end of the compression rod into his abdomen. The slaver convulsed as electricity coursed through him, his vibroblade clattering to the floor. Rain didn't waste the advantage, spinning to face the second man who was now rushing toward him. Neural prod raised. But before they could collide, a blur of blue-green erupted from behind the workstation. Ilara had escaped through a maintenance access panel Rain hadn't even known existed. She moved with fluid grace, her body seeming to flow around the slaver's attack. In one smooth motion, she seized the neural prod and turned it against its owner, driving it into the side of his neck. The man dropped with a strangled cry, body twitching from the neural overload. The leader, recovering from his surprise, drew his energy pistol. "Valuable or not, I'll burn you down if I have to. Frel!" Rain lunged, desperation lending him speed. The energy pistol discharged, the beam grazing his back, searing flesh and fabric. Pain exploded across his senses, but he kept moving, crashing into the slaver and sending them both to the floor. They grappled desperately, the slaver's superior strength giving him the advantage. The energy pistol swung toward Rain's face, the barrel hot enough to blister skin even without firing. Rain strained against the man's arm, muscles screaming with effort, knowing he was seconds from death. Then Ilara was there, the fallen vibroblade in her hand. With precise movement, she pressed it against the slaver's neck, just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Release him!" she commanded, her voice steady despite the fear Rain could see in her eyes. The slaver froze, then slowly eased his grip on the energy pistol. You're making a mistake, Frel. You belong to the consortium now. Running just increases your debt. I belong to no one, Ilara said, pressing the blade a fraction deeper. Drop the weapon. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for the sudden blaring of alarms. The door to Rain's module slid open again, revealing two station miners in environmental suits, their faces obscured by protective masks. What in the void is happening here? One demanded, taking in the scene with evident confusion. Armed combat is prohibited in the residential sectors. The slaver leader attempted to regain control of the situation. Official business. This woman is wanted for theft. We're authorized recovery agents. The second miner snorted, the sound distorted through his mask. And I'm the Emperor of Mars. No recovery agents operate in Sector 8 without guild clearance. He tapped a heavy wrench against his palm. Which I'm guessing you don't have. The confrontation might have escalated further, but the injured slavers were in no condition to fight, and their leader, still at Ilara's mercy, had few options. After a tense negotiation, during which Rain offered the miners exclusive access to his soil analysis data in exchange for their help, the three slavers were securely bound with utility cables. We'll drop them at the station security office, the lead miner said. Tell them these three were caught tampering with environmental systems. That'll keep them locked up for at least a few days. Rain nodded gratefully, one hand pressed against the energy burn on his back. Thank you. We owe you. The miner shrugged. Just make sure that soil data includes the rare mineral deposits we discussed. He glanced at Ilara, curiosity evident even through his mask. You two should probably not be here when they get out. After the miners departed with their prisoners, Rain collapsed onto his bed, the adrenaline fading and leaving him shaking with delayed shock and pain. Ilara knelt beside him, her expression concerned. You're injured. It's not deep, Rain assured her, though each movement sent fresh waves of agony across his back. There's a medical kit in the storage compartment. While Ilara retrieved the kit, Rain struggled out of his burned shirt, wincing as fabric pulled away from scorched flesh. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it was painful and would leave a scar. Ilara returned with the medical kit and hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Rain realized that for all her adaptive skills, she might never have treated a human injury before. The blue canister contains antiseptic spray, he instructed, and the silver packet has a synthetic skin patch. With gentle hands, Ilara cleaned the wound, her touch cool against his inflamed skin. Why did you protect me? She asked softly as she worked. They would have killed you. Rain closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of her fingers rather than the pain. Because you deserve to be protected. Because I failed your people once before. Because... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't come. Because you are a good man, Ilara finished for him, pressing the synthetic skin patch over his wound. A rare thing, in my experience. Rain wanted to protest. He wasn't good. He was a coward who had stood by while an entire species was nearly exterminated. But the relief of the pain-blocking medication in the skin patch washed over him, and he found himself drifting toward unconsciousness. The last thing he felt was Ilara's hand resting lightly on his shoulder, an anchor in the darkness. He woke to the soft sounds of movement in his module. Opening his eyes, he found Ilara packing his soil samples into transport containers, her movements efficient and purposeful. What are you doing? He asked, his voice rough from sleep. Ilara looked up, relief evident in her expression. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. The miners returned with a warning. The slavers had backup. They're searching the station for us. She gestured to the packed containers. We need to leave. Rain sat up carefully, testing the limits of his injury. The synthetic skin patch had done its work. The pain had receded to a dull throb. Leave the station? He asked, mind still foggy. To go where? There's an abandoned mining outpost on Aguar 6, Ilara explained. One of the miners told me about it. It's off the official transit routes, uninhabited since the ore veins ran dry. We could disappear there. The proposition hung in the air between them. Leave everything behind. His work, his routine, the small life he had carved out of guilt and memory, to flee with a woman he barely knew to an abandoned moon. It should have been a difficult decision. It wasn't. How soon can we go? Rain asked, already reaching for his backup data drives. Ilara's shoulders relaxed. Tension he hadn't even noticed draining away. The miners have arranged transport on a supply drone. It leaves in 2 hours. They worked quickly, packing only essentials: Rain's soil samples and research equipment, basic survival supplies, the medical kit, everything else, clothes, personal items, the small comforts that had made the module a home, had to be left behind. As they prepared to leave, Rain took one last look around the space that had been his sanctuary and prison for the past 3 years. He felt no regret at leaving it behind. The journey to the supply dock was tense, requiring them to navigate through maintenance tunnels to avoid detection. Ilara moved with silent grace, her Mayari senses alert to any danger. Rain followed, ignoring the pain that flared with each sudden movement. The supply drone was little more than a cargo container, with minimal life support and a navigation system. The miner, who had arranged their escape, met them at the loading bay, face still obscured by his environmental mask. "It's programmed for Aguar 6, low orbit insertion," he explained. "You'll need to manually pilot the final approach. Landing coordinates are already in the system." Rain handed over a data chip. As promised, complete soil analysis with mineral composition. It should help you locate the high-yield deposits. The miner nodded, pocketing the chip. "Good luck out there. Aguar 6 isn't much, but it's beyond corporate jurisdiction. You'll be free, at least." Free? The word echoed in Rain's mind as he and Ilara secured themselves in the cramped confines of the supply drone. Freedom had never been his goal. He had willingly imprisoned himself in penance for his failures. But now, looking at Ilara, strapped into the seat beside him, he realized that freedom was exactly what they both needed. Freedom from the past, from guilt, from the mud that had protected and imprisoned them both. The launch was rough, the drone not designed for passenger comfort. They were thrown against their restraints as the small craft separated from Calder Station and accelerated toward the distant speck that was Aguar 6. Through the small viewport, Rain watched Calder Station recede, its massive bulk diminishing until it was just another light among the stars. Beside him, Ilara's face was turned toward the same view, her expression unreadable. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. Ilara considered the question before answering. "Yes," she admitted. "But I have been afraid every day since Kesson 3 fell. At least now. I am afraid while moving forward, not while hiding." Her hand found his in the darkness between their seats, her cool fingers intertwining with his warm ones. It was a small gesture, but in it, Rain felt the stirrings of something he had thought forever lost: hope. The journey to Aguar 6 took 18 hours in the slow-moving drone. They took turns sleeping, one always awake to monitor the rudimentary systems and watch for pursuit. None came. Perhaps the slavers had given up, or perhaps they had decided that one escaped Frel wasn't worth the effort of an interplanetary chase. Either way, they reached Aguar 6's orbit without incident. The moon hung before them, a rust-colored sphere scarred by abandoned mining operations. Once, it had been a bustling outpost, supplying rare minerals to the corporate worlds. Now it was just another used-up resource, discarded and forgotten, a fitting refuge for two people who had been similarly discarded. Rain took manual control for the descent, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. The coordinates led them to a cluster of abandoned habitat modules nestled in a shallow valley. As they approached, He could see that time and neglect had taken their toll. Some modules had collapsed entirely, while others showed signs of structural damage from dust storms and temperature fluctuations. "Home sweet home," he murmured as he guided the drone to a landing on a flat section of bedrock. They emerged cautiously, environmental suits protecting them from Aguar 6's thin, cold atmosphere. The abandoned outpost was eerily silent, the only sound the whistle of wind through damaged structures. After a thorough reconnaissance, they identified 2 intact habitat modules that could be connected to form a livable space. The next days were filled with exhausting work, sealing leaks, repairing life support systems, establishing power through the still-functioning solar arrays. Rain's wound protested each exertion, but he pushed through the pain, driven by the need to create safety. Gradually, the connected modules became habitable. The air recyclers wheezed, but functioned. The heating elements provided enough warmth to keep the bitter cold at bay. Water condensers extracted moisture from the thin atmosphere, providing a meager but sufficient supply for their needs. It wasn't comfortable, but it was secure, a place where they could exhale after years of holding their breath. On their 10th day on Aguar 6, Rain unpacked the last of his soil samples. Each container was carefully labeled with its origin world and specific location. He arranged them on a makeshift shelf, a library of extinct ecosystems. Ilara watched him from across the small common area they had established between the 2 modules. "What will you do with them now?" she asked. "There are no laboratories here to continue your research." Rain's hands lingered on a container labeled Kesson 3, Southern River Basin. "They're more than research now," he said. "They're seeds." Over the following weeks, they established a routine. Mornings were spent on maintenance and essential tasks, checking environmental systems, collecting water, repairing the inevitable failures of the aging equipment. Afternoons, Rain worked with his soil samples, not just analyzing them now, but using them to start a small hydroponic garden in one corner of the module. Most of the seeds and spores in his samples were dormant, possibly dead, but some responded to moisture and nutrients, sending up tentative shoots of green. Each new growth was a small miracle, a defiance of the corporate sterilization that had tried to erase entire worlds. Ilara, too, flourished in their makeshift home. Away from the constant fear of discovery, she regained strength and vitality. Her natural Mayari luminescence brightened, giving her skin a subtle glow that was especially visible in the dim light of evening. She spent hours exploring the abandoned outpost, bringing back salvaged materials and occasionally small native organisms that had adapted to Aguar 6's harsh conditions. They grew closer, almost without noticing. Shared meals became opportunities for conversation, for learning about each other's worlds and experiences. Ilara told stories of Kesson 3 before the humans came, tales of river ceremonies and seasonal migrations, of the complex interconnections between Mayari clans and their environment. Rain shared his own history, his childhood on a corporate agri-world, his idealistic entry into ecological negotiation, and his gradual disillusionment as he realized the role was meant to provide a veneer of consideration while the machinery of exploitation ground on. In the evenings, they would sometimes climb to a ridge above their valley and watch Aguar 6's spectacular sunsets, the atmosphere turning the dying light into bands of crimson and gold. Sitting side by side, they plotted constellations neither of them recognized, creating new myths for a new life. On one such evening, as they watched the last light fade from the sky, Ilara's hand found Rain's, her webbed fingers intertwining with his, as had become their habit. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly, "for saving me." Rain shook his head. "You saved yourself. You survived when everyone said it was impossible." "I survived," Ilara agreed. "But I wasn't living. I was mud, hiding, afraid, barely breathing." Her silver eyes reflected the emerging stars. "You gave me back my name, my breath, My future. She leaned forward, hesitant, uncertain, and pressed her lips to his, a gesture she had learned from observation, not tradition, as the Mayari expressed affection differently. The kiss was brief, cool against his warmth, but in it, Rain felt a promise. When she pulled back, he touched her face gently, tracing the delicate ridges along her temple. You gave me back purpose, he told her. After Kesson 3, I thought all I could do was remember. You showed me I could still build. That night, she didn't return to her separate sleeping area in the second module. Instead, she curled beside him in his narrow bed, her body fitting against his, as though designed for the purpose. They didn't speak. Words seemed inadequate for the boundary they had crossed, the new territory they were exploring together. In the darkness, with Alara's steady breathing beside him, Rain realized that he had found something he had never expected. Not just purpose or hope, but home. Home in the most primal sense. Not a place, but a connection, a belonging. Their life on Aguar 6 settled into a pattern of small victories and setbacks. The hydroponic garden expanded as more seeds germinated. They discovered an abandoned water recycling system that, once repaired, significantly improved their supply. One of the remaining habitat modules collapsed during a dust storm, but they salvaged valuable components from the wreckage. 3 months after their arrival, they made their most significant discovery. While exploring a series of abandoned storage tunnels, Alara found crates of terraforming supplies, soil enhancers, atmospheric processors, and most precious of all, seeds. Not the random specimens Rain had collected, but carefully selected varieties designed to thrive in marginal environments. They were preparing to convert Aguar 6 into an agricultural outpost. Rain realized as they inventoried their find. But when the mineral deposits were exhausted, the project was abandoned. Their loss, Alara said with a rare smile. Our gain. With these new resources, their ambitions expanded. No longer content with mere survival, they began to terraform their small valley. Atmospheric processors were placed at strategic points to increase oxygen levels. Soil enhancers were spread in areas protected from the worst winds. Seeds were planted according to a careful plan that Rain developed based on his ecological knowledge. Most failed. The conditions were too harsh, the equipment too old, their expertise too limited. But some took root. Hardy grasses, low-growing mosses, fungal networks that spread through the soil. Each success, no matter how small, was celebrated as a victory against the sterility that had claimed so many worlds. 6 months into their exile, Alara made an announcement that changed everything. I am carrying life, she said one morning, as they tended to the slowly expanding garden. Rain looked up from the soil sensor he was calibrating, not immediately understanding. Then comprehension dawned, and with it, wonder and terror in equal measure. You're pregnant, he asked, the word inadequate for the Mayari concept Alara had expressed. She nodded, placing a hand over her abdomen. The child grows. I feel its energy joining with mine. Rain set down his tools with shaking hands. A child, half human, half Mayari, was something he had never considered possible. The genetic differences should have made it impossible. And yet, life found a way, as it always did when given the slightest opportunity. Is this a good thing? He asked cautiously, aware that he knew little about Mayari reproduction or child-rearing. Ilara's expression softened. It is the best thing. On Kesson 3, children were considered the ultimate gift, not just to the parents, but to the entire community. Each new life meant new possibilities, new combinations of traits and talents. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. This child will be the first of a new people, neither fully human nor fully Mayari, but something new, a beginning, not an ending. The months that followed were filled with preparations. They expanded their living space, creating a separate area for the child. Rain pored over his limited medical data, trying to anticipate the needs of a hybrid infant. Ilara wove blankets from salvaged materials, incorporating traditional Mayari patterns that she remembered from her childhood. As Ilara's pregnancy progressed, they faced new challenges. Her metabolism changed, requiring adjustments to her diet. The thin atmosphere of Aguar 6, barely adequate for 2 adults, would need enrichment for an infant's developing lungs. The temperature regulation in their modules, always temperamental, became critical as Ilara's body struggled to maintain the perfect environment for the growing child. Yet for every problem, they found a solution. Rain modified the atmospheric processors to create a zone of enriched air around their habitat. Ilara discovered that certain native plants, when properly prepared, provided nutrients essential to her changing body. Together, they transformed their survival shelter into a home worthy of new life. 9 months after their arrival on Aguar 6, standing on the ridge where they had first kissed, Rain asked Ilara a question. "What will we name the child?" Ilara considered this, her hand resting on her swollen abdomen, where new life stirred. In Mayari tradition, a child is not named until its nature reveals itself. Names are earned, not given. "But it will need something to be called," Rain pointed out. "Yes," Ilara agreed. "A calling name, until the true name emerges." She looked out over their valley, where patches of green now broke the rust-colored monotony. "How about Nail, after the one who stood against the ships?" Rain felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Nile," he repeated. "It's perfect." As they stood there, watching the sun set on their transformed valley, Rain realized how far they had come from their first meeting in the filthy corridor of Calder Station. Then, Ilara had been a creature of mud and fear, and he, a man trapped in guilt and memory. Now they stood as builders, creators of a new world and a new life. "You know," he said, slipping his arm around Ilara's shoulders, "when I first saw you, they said you were too dirty to touch." Ilara leaned into his embrace. "And you were the only one who dared bring me home, bathe me, give me a name, and make room for you in my blanket." Rain finished with a smile. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the gathering darkness, the first of their terraforming projects began to glow. Bioluminescent mosses that Ilara had cultivated from spores, found in one of Rain's Kesson 3 samples. The soft blue-green light spread across the valley floor, like stars fallen to earth. Ilara's face, illuminated by the glow that matched her own skin, turned toward Rain's. "You are home," she said simply. "Since the moment you washed the mud from me and gave me a name." Rain placed his hand over hers, on her rounded abdomen, feeling the flutter of new life beneath. "And now we make a home for one more." As they walked back to their modules, 2 figures silhouetted against the otherworldly glow of their creation. Rain thought about the long journey that had brought them here, from the sterile corridors of power, where he had failed to save a world, to the filthy underbelly of Calder Station where he had found Ilara, to this harsh moon, where they had built something new from the ruins of the old. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could undo the loss of Kesson 3, or the years Ilara had spent hiding in filth. But it was a beginning, a chance to create rather than merely remember, to build rather than mourn. In the morning, they would continue their work, planting seeds, repairing systems, preparing for the child that would represent a new chapter in both their species' histories. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt, but they would face them together, no longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they were creating. And when their child was born, this miraculous being that science said shouldn't exist but love had made possible, they would tell it the story of how its parents met, how one was too dirty to touch, and the other touched her anyway. How that simple act of compassion had led, step by step, to this new life and new world. As they reached the entrance to their home, Rain paused, looking back at the valley, now transformed by their efforts. In the starlight, he could see the first true tree they had planted, a sapling grown from a seed he had carried from Kesson 3, the last of its kind. From ashes to green, he murmured, an old ecological negotiator's saying. Beside him, Ilara repeated the phrase in her native tongue, the words flowing like water over stones. Then she added something more, a Mayari blessing for new beginnings. Together, they stepped across the threshold, leaving the past outside, embracing the future within. In the months that followed, Ilara's pregnancy progressed with both wonder and complication. The hybrid nature of their child presented unique challenges. Mayari gestation typically lasted longer than human pregnancy, and the developmental milestones followed neither species pattern exactly. Rain spent hours analyzing what limited medical data he had, trying to anticipate issues before they arose. Despite their isolation and limited resources, they created a nurturing environment for their coming child. Rain constructed a crib from salvaged materials, carefully sanding each piece until no rough edge remained. Ilara wove soft blankets from processed plant fibers, incorporating traditional Mayari patterns meant to stimulate a newborn's developing senses. As Ilara's due date approached, a best guess based on the hybrid development rate they had observed, they prepared for birth with a mixture of scientific planning and ancient wisdom. Rain sterilized their limited medical equipment and studied emergency delivery procedures. Ilara practiced Mayari breathing techniques and prepared herbal infusions known to ease birth pains. Their child was born on a night when Aguar 6's thin atmosphere was alive with electrical storms. Rain had never felt so helpless or so essential as he did during those long hours, supporting Ilara through waves of pain, encouraging her when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her determination. When their daughter finally emerged, tiny, perfect, with skin that shimmered between human pink and Mayari blue, both parents wept. She had Rain's human eyes, but Ilara's silver irises, 5-fingered hands with slight webbing between the digits, and faint ridges along her temples that echoed her mother's more pronounced features. "Nile," Ilara whispered, cradling the infant against her chest. "Light in darkness." The weeks following Nile's birth transformed their existence once again. Sleep became a precious commodity, snatched in brief intervals between the newborn's demands. Their carefully established routines dissolved into a constant cycle of feeding, cleaning, and soothing their daughter. Yet, amid the exhaustion and adjustment, there was joy unlike anything either had experienced. Neil's first smile, the way she turned toward the sound of Rain's voice, the luminescent glow her skin emitted when Ilara sang Mayari lullabies. Each small development was a miracle that repaid every sacrifice. As Nile grew, so did their terraforming project. The valley that had once been barren rust-colored dirt now supported expanding patches of vegetation. The atmospheric processors had gradually increased the oxygen content, making it possible to work outside with only minimal breathing assistance. Water condensers, supplemented by the discovery of an ice deposit beneath the valley floor, provided enough moisture to support their modest agriculture. One morning, as Rain tended to their most ambitious project, a grove of saplings grown from Kesson 3 seeds, Ilara joined him. Nail, strapped to her chest in a carrier, fashioned from salvaged fabric. "She should know these trees," Ilara said, running her fingers along a leaf that shimmered with faint bioluminescence. "They are her heritage, just as the stars are." Rain nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. Their daughter would grow up knowing neither her father's homeworld nor her mother's. Her only reality would be this small valley on an abandoned moon, populated by just 3 beings and the life they had brought to it. "We'll tell her everything," he promised, gently touching Niall's cheek. About Earth and Kesson 3. About the river clans and the negotiators. She'll know where she comes from, even if she never sees those places. And we'll tell her about how we met, Ilara added with a small smile. How they said I was too dirty to touch. But you touched me anyway. Rain leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Ilara's in the Miari gesture of affection she had taught him. And how that touch saved us both. That night, as Niall slept peacefully in her crib, Rain and Ilara stood at the entrance to their home, looking out at the valley illuminated by starlight and the gentle glow of their bioluminescent plants. In the distance, where the valley opened to a wider plain, they could see movement, native Aguar 6 creatures, drawn to the oasis they had created in the wasteland. Life calls to life, Ilara observed softly. Rain slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. And love calls to love. Together, they watched as their daughter slept and their garden grew, proof that even in the harshest conditions, with enough care and patience, the most unexpected things could flourish. They had come to Aguar 6 as refugees, carrying only soil samples and bitter memories. They would leave it, someday, when Niall was old enough and their work secure enough, as pioneers, with seeds to plant on other forgotten worlds, and stories to share of how barrenness could become bounty. But that was for the future. For now, they had each other, their daughter, and the green valley they had created from nothing but hope and determination. It was more than enough. It was everything. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, turning the sky from black to deep purple, Rain thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a filthy corridor, where a mud-covered woman had looked at him with silver eyes, to this moment of perfect contentment. Home, he whispered, the word encompassing not just their shelter of salvaged modules, but everything they had built together, family, garden, future. Beside him, Ilara echoed the word in her native tongue, the sound like water flowing over stones. Then she added something more, a phrase Rain had come to know well in their time together. From mud to stars, she said, that is our path. Rain nodded, watching as the sun's first rays illuminated their valley, bringing color to the world they had created. From mud to stars, he agreed, together. And as their daughter stirred, beginning to wake with the new day, they turned back inside, ready to continue the work of building life from emptiness, love from loneliness, home from exile. It was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in the mud of survival, but in the clear light of possibility. For having found each other when all seemed lost, they had discovered the most profound truth of all, that even in a universe bent on sterility and exploitation, life and love would find a way to flourish. All it took was one person willing to reach out and touch what others deemed too dirty, too broken, too foreign to embrace. In that touch, worlds could be saved, not just remembered. And in the years that followed, as their daughter grew strong and their garden expanded beyond the valley to reclaim more of Aguar 6's barren surface, Rain and Ilara would often recall that first meeting, she covered in protective mud, he carrying soil samples like memories. Two lost souls who had found in each other not just companionship, but redemption. Not the grand redemption of saving entire worlds. That opportunity had passed. But the quiet, profound redemption of saving each other, of creating new life where before there had been only remembrance and regret. It was enough. It was everything. From mud to stars, indeed.